up new buildings, we're knocking down the old. We're working in the summer heat and in the winter cold. And the labour power we sell, me boys, for a hard-earned weekly pay, produces mighty profits for the greedy MBA.
Hello, this is Ralph Edwards, ACCA, Warren from the Concrete Gang, and I'll be presenting a fill-in Concrete Gang show during their well-earned summer break. This is part of an ongoing series called Creatures of the Industry, and that's going to record the people who made our industry over the last 50 years as they reflect on that history and their time in it.
We faced deregistration, it backfired in the face. We're not fooled by arbitration, we won't stay in our place. We hit the bosses hard and fast to win and keep our gains, and break a couple of concrete pours to back our log of claims. So keep your powder dry and hold your head up high. It's class to class and face to face, our limit is the sky. We've got a fighting history and we never will be cowed. Our builders' labour is a name to make a man feel proud.
Hello to all the listeners. We are at the inaugural conversation about the history of the construction industry in Victoria with the redoubtable Maurie Hill. Good morning, Maurie. How are you?
Good morning, Ralph.
And we might start by just getting a few details, Maurie, about when you first came into the industry and how you got started and what it was like back then.
Well, I probably come from a pretty different background than most people in the union movement. I was born and bred in a little town called St Arnaud up in the Wimmera. I left school when I was 14. My first job was at Motor Spares. I had a very bad boss. I walked out on him at 14. Then I worked for a...
Well, you were a troublemaker all along, were you?
That was it. So then I worked for a fabrication company, welding up farm machinery and steel sheds and putting up steel sheds and fuel tanks and all the rest of it. I was a self-taught welder. I worked there for a few years. I worked also for a tractor cabin company in Ararat. And at that stage, I also worked as a Caldex distributor in St Arnaud, driving the truck for a Caldex distributor. But that stage, I probably knew nothing about unions, never seen a union. I think the first time I ever saw a union official was filing out of the Gason's factory in Ararat, and some bloke was at the door there, some union official. After that I had a pretty serious accident there in Geelong, head-on crash down in Geelong. Spent 7 months in Geelong Hospital. And of course, up until then I had no contact with unions whatsoever. I didn't know anything about unions. But a little bit of trucking experience, I got a job with a company called Transwest, carton fuel oil. And with that wasn't a very good company. We used to get paid trip money and they were ripping us off blind. And I dare say I woke myself up to myself was then they give me 4 tyres for my car. I said, there's something wrong here, that's not right. So, anyway, I had a bit of a thing and I think much support I got to say, and I got put on to wages. Well, I used to cast sulphuric acid and all that sort of stuff, but got put on to wages. And of course, they didn't like me much after that. Didn't like me at all. But, mate, I dare say, I was carting bricks one time. A truck in front of me got bogged, and we worked all through lunch getting him out of the bog, and went back and they said, you want to get paid for that? I said, yes. And they said, well, they wanted to sack me. And that stage, Transwest had a lot of trouble with new brick in Melbourne, all the brick carters. And the brick carters got to hear about it. They decided if you don't fix this up, if you don't put him back on, then you're going to lose your contract with new brick. So the next day I got called in the office and I was told, look, we're very sorry about all this whole thing, Maurie. Not until we looked at your tachograph that we saw what you were doing. So they put me back on. But I was smart enough then to realise what a union was all about. And I was smart enough them days to get put on the executive of the transport workers in Geelong. Anyway, to make a long story short, I finished up leaving there, went to work on the wharf in Geelong on the cranes, and had a very good relationship with Transwest after that. They wasn't going to ring me and I wasn't going to ring them.
So, Maurie, life's experience made you into a unionist.
Oh, definitely, yep.
But in terms of the construction industry, you went to the wharves. How did you then go from the maritime industry into construction?
Well, down the wharf, after tug strikes in Geelong, the steel stopped coming into Geelong. And so it was last on, first off, so most of us got the big A, you know. In the meantime, I bummed around doing this and that and got a little job on a little crane for the waterworks. And LS come and chased me for a crane driver. So I went to work in mobile cranes, which I eventually went back to wharf, and I noticed things had gone different then, and they chased me to go back to the crane company again. So I become the delegate. I was co-delegate on the wharf, and then become the delegate at Brambles. And
so you really came into the industry through the mobile crane sector.
Yes.
And in those days, that would have been the FEDFA.
That's right, yep.
And
well, I first joined the FEDFA because them days the crane drivers on the wharf was FEDFA.
So the gantry cranes and all that
yep,
were all FEDFA.
That's right, yeah. All the portals were all FEDFA. And then when I went back there, that's about when they changed over to be all watersiders. And of course, when I went back to work for the crane company, there wasn't much support there. And I used to feel sorry for Pat Preston. He used to come down and do his best, and nobody was backing him much, so I got pretty involved in there. And that stage it was Brambles, and I didn't have any love with Brambles, and they didn't have much love for me either.
Well, Brambles stayed around for a long time in the mobile crane sector and also the industry generally, but you didn't stay at Brambles.
I worked for Brambles, yeah. Went from Elliott's to Brambles, which is the same. They sold that to Brambles. And then, of course, deregistration came along, and Pat Preston asked me to come on board as a temporary union official, which I did.
So can you remember which year that was?
86.
So it was right in the middle of dereg.
My first day as a union official was the first day of deregistration.
1st of March.
1st of March.
Yeah.
They kept me on for 3 months, and those Brambles finished up saying, well, look, are we going to get him back, although we don't want the bastard back? And so I went back to work for a few weeks, and then they got me back on. I've been on there ever since, you know.
Yeah. So in terms of mobile cranes, which is not necessarily all in construction, because as you and I both are fully aware, the mobile crane industry is somewhat of a separate sector which has serviced many different parts of industry, and construction is an important part, but it's not the only part. Did you always work in the metals area and so on, or did you cross into construction as such?
Well, down around Geelong, you've seen everything. At that stage, there's construction at Alcoa, there's construction putting the malt house in there, the big wool sheds and all the rest of it. Plus, I used to spend a lot of time in the Shell refinery and into Alcoa and the cement works and all those places. I dare say when I come on board for the union, Pat Preston used to look after the mobile crane industry, and I sort of worked as a backup to him. But them days, you'd have cranes working all over the place without dogmen and close to power lines and Christ knows what, you know. And my name went through the industry like you wouldn't believe, because I used to send all the cranes back to the yard. As soon as a crane without a dogman, I'd send him back to the yard, and of course... But eventually that worked out right, because nowadays there's always a dogman there, you know. And of course now we've got rules about sitting close to power lines and all the rest of it. And I think we might have avoided a couple of deaths through that, you know.
Yeah. In terms of when you first came into the construction industry through mobile cranes, what was the state of the industry at that time? Was it well organised? Was it health and safety conscious? What do you reckon was the industry as you knew it? Obviously in Geelong, but it would have been reflective of the industry much more widely.
Health and safety was nothing like it is now. But when I went to work for the union, of course I wasn't just around Geelong. I was fed for the pepper and salt union, where we used to go around, I think everywhere from Thomastown all over the state I used to go, you know. And so I learned a hell of a lot about the construction industry then. And I've got to tell you, sometimes I'd be driving round and I'd be bloody lost in Melbourne, didn't know where the hell I was, you know. And you'd see a crane.
A few people would say that's common to Geelong people.
And I'd see a crane bloody jib sticking up somewhere. And that was too much for me, so I'd have to go and see what was going on. I'd find this construction site there, and I said, how did you find us here, you know? Little I tell them I was lost, but...
And the cranes in those days, we can remember some of the dinosaurs that used to run around. When you became a FEDFA official, had the quality and sophistication of cranes improved, or was there still a lot of the old clunker things running around?
Oh, back in them days, those 9-ton crane was a big crane, a 20-ton was a big crane, but nowadays, 50-ton was a blooming taxi crane. Like, I mean, you wouldn't entertain them now. What's around today, you know?
Today, in those days, of course, the mobile crane was a supplement, and most of the lifting was done either by tower cranes or by pin jibs. And did you have much to do with the pin jibs and that on the big construction sites?
A little bit, not a lot on the tower cranes.
What about the pin jibs and that?
Oh, well, they were mobile cranes, you know, they'd be all over the place, you know.
And was that a somewhat different sector with different attitudes to the hydraulic cranes, or pretty much the same?
Well, no, your tower cranes are virtually confined to where there's a construction site. You know, people work there all the time. That's their job until the job finishes. With mobile cranes, you might spend a day on a job. You might spend a day in a petrochemical or in a cement works or an Alcoa or wherever it might be, but you move from place to place. And the big thing, as far as I'm concerned, with the union was their opening to get into other places. Now, the smaller building sites and all the rest, that's where we used to make gains, you know. If you're on a tower crane, you're on that job until the job's finished. And with a mobile crane, you're virtually all over the place. And you never know where you go on that day. You never know what time the phone's going to ring after hours and you'd call back into work and all the rest of it. So I think, as far as the union's concerned, the mobile cranes was a big opening for the construction union. Instead of having a few big sites that, not a few sites, they had big sites that they had their power at, they also found that they had a lot of smaller sites where you could pick up a lot of members. And you could improve a lot of conditions as well, you know.
Well, in terms of the conditions, the pay wasn't all that good, as I would recall.
It wasn't.
But in that period of the 1980s, things started to change. And what was the sort of rates that people were on when you were driving mobile cranes, and how did they work out those rates, and where did you get to, do you think, during that period?
Well, I think back in them days, you're on about equivalent to a truck driver's wages. Now, Pat Preston used to hold delegates meetings once a month for the crane hire people, but he had a deal going with the crane hirers. The meetings got to be in the afternoon. And there's about 4 people turned up, and they all come from different Brambles places. By the time I got back to Geelong and started firing a few bullets, they knew what I was going to do because someone had been to the minute had already told them what was going on. So I probably changed all that to build FEDFA build a construction meetings around the Tuesday. The crane I meet me on Wednesday afternoon. Well, I changed that. I could see it from they doing things for the construction workers, so I brought them back in the same day. And so the crane hire people go to the construction people and then have their own meeting after. which I think brought in a lot of improvements. And yet that's why, back in the old days, I can remember trying to catch up with the building industry. And I think eventually we caught up with the building industry, you know.
I wouldn't sell yourself short, Maurie. I think you went past the building industry.
Well, I think we deserved it.
On a serious point,
yeah.
The rates of pay would have improved more dramatically in the 1990s, perhaps in the 80s. The 80s was where you were trying to establish a decent rate compared to the truck driver rate. But with the 1990s have been a more productive period in terms of outcomes.
That would have happened as EBA started. I know a bit of a free run with EBAs. But up until then, you was always told by Sydney that it's a federal award and you can't do this and you can't do that. Well, the EBAs had allowed us to get round that. And maybe you could say, yeah, we've got to pass the building industry in places, but there's a lot of qualifications being a mobile crane driver too. And that is, you aren't always going where there's a good amenities, where you get looked after. You've got to go to a site and then work it out for yourself what you're going to do. Could be going to derailment, could be anything. And of course, you know, those blokes, if they haven't got a licence, haven't got a job. And also you'll find that the machines they're driving today, not back in them days, I suppose they're worth a quid in them days, but not that much, but the machines they're driving around in today are worth millions of dollars. So they've got a lot of responsibility, you know. But one of the upsides for the crane hire industry is in the construction industry, you've got a job which might go for 3, 6, 12 months or something, then she's all over Red Rover, and you've got to find another job, and that could take time to do it. Those crane hire blokes are probably lucky because it continues on and on and on, you know.
With the EBAs, what do you think was the breakthrough in terms of rates, conditions? The award's always been there, but the EBA is based on the award. But is there any particular breakthroughs that you can remember? There were some blues, if I also recall.
Oh, some blues. One thing, and Paddy Preston started it, was the situation with site allowances in mobile cranes. Because what used to happen, or what Pat done, he brought in this $1.50 an hour site allowance, no matter where you worked, which was a great thing, because the boys that used to suck up to the boss, they used to go to all the good sites, and the bloke that liked to stick up for himself a bit, he used to go to the sites got nothing. So at least that way it evened things out, so everybody got that $1.50. And probably where it worked for me in EBAs is perhaps the crane hirers weren't smart enough to realise what an all-purpose rate was. And of course when we started the all-purpose rate, that worked out very well for the blokes, you know.
Overtime on a weekend.
Overtime. And, yep. On the mobile cranes, I used to get some bloody great things like you'd be called out all hours of the night to Alcoa or Shell and all those places, or the bunkers on ships were a great one. And in the award, if you cracked midnight and second to 4 hours double time, you get 8 hours double time. So that used to work out really good, you know. That's how you used to make your money.
Are there any other breakthroughs that you can remember after the introduction of EBA, so through to the early 2000s?
No, the only thing, perhaps on the health and safety side of things, we had a couple of fatalities with power lines, and we were pretty close to the chief electrical inspector then, and they took a lot of advice off us, and we got the rules made on how far you could work from a power line and things like that. I think that saved a few blokes over the time. But things like that definitely improved, and the fact you was always working with a dogman, that improved too, because, you know, once upon a time you used to go to a site and they'd expect you to be jumping out of your crane and do the dogging yourself, you know, so all those things improved, you know.
With the introduction of the EBAs, a lot more detail went into wages and conditions and allowances and so on. Was there any marked differences in the allowances, and you mentioned site allowance, but other allowances and other provisions in terms of penalty rates and so on?
No, virtually that dollar, which went to $1.59 and become an all-purpose rate, sort of overcome most of that, you know.
Yeah.
And whether you're sent up to the biggest shithole in town to work, you still got it rather than you go to a prime site. And if the site did pay more, then they used to make up the difference.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the equipment, in the 80s, we were seeing 50-tonne cranes coming on the scene. How do you think the capacity of cranes changed over the period from, say, 86 through to 2006?
Oh, they've got bigger and bigger. But when I first come on scene, some of those cranes looked all right, but they were in pretty bad nick getting around towns. Like I said, they'd be working with that dogman up against power lines, and for a start, you send the crane back to the yard and the blokes be shitting themselves and the bosses would be carrying on and all the rest of it. But then after a while, as the blokes start to get used to it, and you start talking about the condition of their crane, and they'll be saying to you quietly, well, did you have a look at that outrigger on the other side there? And so they were starting to see the benefits of getting machines up to scratch and with safe machines. And then, of course, the other thing that happened in the finish was when we were vocally starting Crane Safe with the 12-month crane inspections. And I think that improved things out of sight as far as instead of cranes getting dilapidated, they had an inspection every 12 months and they had to be brought up to scratch.
Well, people take that, the green sticker,
that's right, yeah,
as a basic requirement. It's even now being recognised and enforced by WorkSafe.
That's right, yeah.
Who have taken themselves a long time to get up to scratch.
Didn't know what.
But when do you think that really started having an effect with the more reputable companies? Because Crane Safe is a non-government body and therefore can't enforce its rulings.
Well, CICA, Crane Industry Council for Australia, they put their money where their mouth is and they probably run the thing, you know. Like back in my days, we used to, of the accessors, have a meeting every quarter, and I used to go along and I used to have a fair bit of say, and so from then it's got better and better. They've got engineers working from it all now, so I think that sort of come in pretty quickly because people could see it was the advantage of it.
Can you remember when the first green stickers were actually issued? Would I be correct?
I can't remember the top of me.
Would I be correct in saying late 90s?
Possibly. In fact, the first green sticker actually had the FEDFA emblem written on it as well, which I'd imagine would be gone now.
Yeah. So, in terms of other developments that went along with the green sticker and the issue of power lines and so on, are there any other issues that stand out as being serious and correct advances in health and safety? Christmas trees?
Yeah, that was another thing, the Christmas trees. At that stage, there's always somebody wanted a bit more out of the crane, what it'll do. And that was a way of trying to educate the drivers and the dogmen and the client to say, well, this is as far as the crane can go. You know, you can't get that extra bloody metre because if you do, it'll fall over.
So how did the Christmas tree actually work?
Well, the green light's on the Christmas tree. Then when you get to 90% of your capacity, the orange light comes on. Then your 100%, the red light comes on. I don't know how it goes now with the new computerised stuff, whether they still survive. I don't know how that works. But most cranes today, they won't do it. And see, with a hydraulic crane, it's a bit different to a pin jib. The jib on a hydraulic crane is often very heavy. And when you get out enough radius, sometimes it'll fall over that and on the hook even, you know. So, but with a hydraulic, that's where the advantage of a hydraulic for radius, you know. With a pin jib, you know.
In terms of improvements, the hydraulics were the area which you were particularly concentrating on. What about the pin jibs? Did pin jib issues arise for you right through that period as well?
Well, yeah, it's all interlocked, I suppose. And I've seen a few pin jibs that popped the lattice work and that because it's been overloaded, but pin jibs are probably a smaller market than nearly everything's a hydraulic crane these days. So for long term on site, the pin jib's probably often more suitable, you know.
Yeah, and in fact, they usually have a greater capacity. or
at radio sheds.
Or should I say, used to have a greater capacity. now the world is changing yet again. But the pin jibs were always a problem in the industry. Not that they went over, but people did try to stretch them.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of radius.
Yep. And I suppose the other thing, perhaps I should have said before, was the training now. I think the training's a lot better than what it ever was. I remember in my days getting a call out into Shell Refinery once where I had to put a fly on a crane. I'd never done it before in a petrochemical. And you just had to learn the way you was going. But today you trained all those things. And so there's no more of that working out as you go sort of thing.
Now, I was leading you, of course, about pin jibs, and I think it probably would be worthwhile just having a talk about some of the major disasters that took place, not just with pin jibs, but also with hydraulics. But I'd maybe suggest we start off with Corio Bridge.
The Sergi Bridge?
Yes.
That action should never have happened.
If you could explain what happened
and
how it happened.
Well, the bridge over the railway line there, they had false work up, and the beams were about, I think it was around about 80 tonne from memory. And so one end of the beam had landed on the false work. Leightons, in their wisdom, had used a lot of the false work out of the Leverton yard, which was rusted through, and there was no tolerance anyway. And of course, the last beam, the false work collapsed as the crane let the weight off, and so the beam come down, and Rob Surge was up top, and he got hit in the back of the head with the equaliser plate, and the rest is history. But that was one of the bad ones. In fact, if that accident hadn't have happened, our independent engineer, I can't recall his name, Ralph, you might recall it, he believed a train coming up there, that bit of a rise, fully laden on Monday morning, would have been enough to pull the whole 400 tonne of beams down on top of it. Would have been like Grafton in New South Wales. So that was one of the bad ones, you know.
But there were, over the journey, your journey, a number of serious collapses. Machines used to go over on their side on a pretty regular basis. How do you think we are today compared to where we were, as we have today looked at a whole lot of pictures that show cranes on their side, cranes with the boom basically in parts and so on. Where do you reckon we are today?
Well, I think with the new cranes, with the computerisation and that, you can't go over the radius. And also on the pick and carry type cranes, we used to do it on a little old truck with a 9-tonne crane behind it. You sit in an awkward position and you'd have to try to manoeuvre this load round. Today you've got these franners that can pick and carry a 25 tonne loader with no problems at all, you know. It's a lot safer way of just doing what we used to do it.
And are there any particular cranes that you might have a view about that they haven't improved? Is there still issues out there?
I'd say if you go up the back blocks, you'd probably find a few, but I think generally if people want to compete in the market down this way in Melbourne and Geelong and the provincial cities, I think cranes have improved, and with crane safe and things like that, then they just wouldn't get through to keep working.
Okay, I'm Ralph Edwards and I'm presenting Creatures of the Industry, a fill-in show during the Concrete Gang's well-earned summer break. Now, one of the other health and safety issues that the industry has had a problem with is the amount of hours that go in and the fact that people are fatigued.
Well,
and there is at this point a prosecution outstanding for a fatality that occurred on the Ring Road, and evidence would suggest that fatigue for the crane driver is still an issue.
Yep. And that used to be the case very much with the bridge beams, Ralph. And you might remember we did a code of practice on bridge beams, and one of the issues was where blokes have been working all day, then they expect to go and put these bridge beams up at night, and so they wasn't really switched on anyway, you know. So very much fatigue, yes. And I dare say money comes into it there, where the blokes seem to think, well, beauty, you know, a few extra bobbing, but, you know, it is bad, you know, they shouldn't be allowed to work double shifts and things like that. And, of course, the companies like to think, oh, well, this is all right too, we getting more money out of it as well, you know. So I don't know how much that's become an issue in the later years, but back in my days it was an issue, yes.
Well, I think the EBA has in more recent times addressed that, but I'm interested in trying to get your feel of where the crane sector is compared to where it was when you started. Are there any things that you think are outstanding improvements or things that maybe should have been dealt with a long time ago?
Well, I think it's totally different now to what it was back in my day, especially as I come on as an organiser when I was driving cranes myself. Compare it today and it's totally different. Like, safety's a lot better and there's somebody watching to make sure it is, But no, it's a different game to what it was. And it wouldn't have survived the way it was now today if you come out and try to do things that we used to do back in them days.
Well, part of the problem is it's between computers and GPS, someone who manufactured the crane in Holland can be actually monitoring what you're doing with a crane in Melbourne.
That's right, yeah, yep.
It does make a difference, but there's always been problems with cheating and pushing
There
people.
will be.
And I guess you're right, there always will be. Now, in terms of the industry, in more general terms, the construction industry in Melbourne and Victoria, where do you think the industry is from your perspective now compared to when you first started getting involved?
I think what's happened where there used to be the hardcore building and construction industry, I think that's all been married in a lot. So you got a lot more interaction and the delegates all go to the same meeting and also, I think the industry spread its wing a lot more and they worked together a lot better than what it was, And back in them days, nobody cared, when I first started, nobody cared much about the civil industry. Well, now I think that's become a lot more part of the industry anyway. In my view, as far as the union's concerned, I think the civil industry is very important to it because when there's peaks and troughs in the building industry, when they get a trough in the building industry, usually the civil industry will carry you through. And it's a bit like a business, you've got to keep going. And that's where I think the old FEDFA used to survive as a small union. Back in them days, they had some people in the construction industry, they had their boiler attendants, the SECV, the owner, all those sort of things, And I think all those industries kept it going. Like when one part died down, the other part kept them going. And I think that's something that the union should keep in mind very much, that not just be a building construction industry, because when there's a bit of a downturn, the civil industry will keep them going, And I think back in the old days, that's where things broke down with the BWIU. When the building industry went quiet, they used to find themselves the financial problems, That's only my opinion too.
No, that's more than welcome to have your opinion, Maurie. Now, the people that you've met in the industry as you've gone through and you're now in retirement, and I'm sure you're still having contact with some of the older brothers and sisters, but also with some of the newer people. But are there any people that you think stand out in the history of the industry in this city and state who have done a bit above and beyond the normal?
That's a hard question, Ralph.
It doesn't have to be officials, but people who have actually made a contribution to the industry, which has been telling in your estimation.
Well, I think most of them have, in their own way. You seem to have some people in the industry that seem to put their hand out for what they can get, and you've got others that do whatever they can for the industry. And I think that's what kept the industry going. And I think in retirement, what you miss more than anything is those people that you work with in the union. So I think that's what you miss in the industry when you retire, is not the stuff that goes on in issues and so forth. It's the people that you worked with that had a bit of principle and wanted to do their thing. So,
in terms of what is now the CFMEU, and the FEDFA was amalgamated into the CFMEU, it operated separately for some time and then was incorporated fully into the CFMEU. Do you think the incorporation of the FEDFA into the construction and general branch was completely productive, or did we lose some things on the way through?
Yes, you lose some of the things as an organisation gets big. It doesn't become more personalised. It's more generalised, I think that's what you would... But having said that, there's a lot of pluses to it too.
Yes, of course.
Yep.
I'm trying to get a more broader view of where you think the union, in general terms, is in the industry. When we all talk, we can all tell war stories, and we can all talk about the glory days, and this one busted a concrete pour and this one went on strike for 6 weeks and so on. But where do you reckon unionism is in the industry at the moment?
Well, that's probably something I can't answer, Rolf, because I've been at it for 12 years now, a bit over 12 years.
Time passes quickly, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, yep. So I can't really see firsthand what's going on, And I think back towards the end of my time, nothing to do with me, but towards the end of my time, that's where the CFMU really was going well, But I think now with the Royal Commissions and having the bloody governments doing, it's not just breaking down the building construction industry in the CFMEU, it's breaking down workers full stop everywhere. So it'd be very hard to compare with what we had to what we got today. And I do think what we used to get away with back in my day, they'd throw the keys away if you tried to do it today. I'm sure of it, The government has really weakened the union movement full stop.
And maybe the union movement hasn't helped itself at certain times, because just reflecting back, all that stuff with the Accord and all the rest of the cooperation with government and so on ended up blowing up in people's faces.
Oh, it did, yep. And when you look at the sad part about it, when you look at, I'm not here to knock anybody, but when you look at some of the people that was going places in the union movement and they jumped the fence completely, that's just a disgrace, And even blokes like Kelty that went to work for Linfox and people in the old FEDFA, and I don't want to name names, but in the old FEDFA and other unions as well, just jumped the fence into the employer side of it. And the funny thing I always found was too, if I had a delegate that was a bit slack, when he jumped the fence, he was a bit of a slack boss, he wasn't a bad bloke. But when I had a delegate or a union official that was very strong, when he jumped the fence, become a boss, he become just as bad the other way.
So we'll go for the weak link every time.
Yep. And the other thing that I've noticed, some of the people who used to come back to me in crane hire back in them days, as they bought their own cranes these days, they're probably not the most wonderful employers either. We're trying to get myself in this trouble here.
And there's a fair few of them running around. But
well, that's the other thing, Ralph. Back in Pat Preston's day and my day, the crane hire industry was virtually governed by, don't quote me, a dozen or a few more crane hire companies. And so if you wanted to have a stoppage or something, you could always pull them together, But today, there's so many one-man bands around, it'd be very hard to look after it now.
Yeah, that's true. Now, in terms of cranes and the future, what are your thoughts on the possibilities of robotics and effectively people operating cranes second-hand through technology rather than actually hands-on? You think that's a distinct possibility, or is there always going to be a human factor that has to be in there?
I think there's always going to be a human factor in it. But go back a few years ago with Chernobyl in Russia, all those cranes were done by remote control back in them days. And so I think it'd take a smarter man than me to know what the future's going to bring. But I do think there's always... And the other thing, I think big companies never really survived that much in the crane industry. There have always been smaller people come up and run, and then if they get too big, they disappear and somebody else comes along. But, Brambles was a good example. Brambles were going to change the world, but Brambles went out the door backwards, didn't they? And you got your smaller companies that survived, and because they've probably got more flexibility. And one of the hard things about looking after the crane industry, I found, was the bosses and the blokes were too close together, and the bosses had too much influence on the bloke to what you could as a union official. In other words, if we've got a new pretty crane coming, if you want to do the right thing, you'll get that new pretty crane. And that they used to keep the blokes on side a lot,
Yes, definitely size does have a difference, and the cranes getting bigger is also having an effect on how a crane operator sees his role, his position in the whole scheme of things.
Well, back in my day, you used to get a little ticket to drive a crane, and you used to drive a little crane, and you used to make little stuff-ups. Today, you go to school, you get a big ticket, you drive a big crane, you start at the top, make big fuck-ups, and work your way down.
Yes, that is a problem. But in terms of your time in the industry, do you regret it at all?
No.
And would you say, even the worst of times, there was always something a bit more than just a job in this industry? Or am I trying to put rose glasses on the past?
I suppose there's an old saying, once a cop, always a cop. I think once you got involved in the building industry, you're always involved in it. I might have come out of crane hire, but I've become very involved in the whole of the build industry. And I made some really good friends out of that build industry, the people I cherish now. But no, I think once you've been another industry you want to be in.
And we did, during this discussion, reflect on the amount of government intervention in terms of unions and all the rest of it. What do you reckon about the proposition that as government and the industry's got bigger and the interference has got bigger and the world has changed a bit in its outlook on how things are, is it as much fun in the industry, the jokes and the comradeship that used to go on compared to as you experienced towards the end of your time?
No, I don't think you can have the same fun and what we used to have in the industry, And we always used to like to look at the comical side of things a bit as you went along and kept a bit of a bright atmosphere about it. And I think today they'd rather run you into the courthouse rather than have a joke with you. I think that's one of the sad things about the industry now.
And are there any times or jobs or projects in the industry that you can recall now which you think were a success in terms of a good job, well done by the employer and appreciated and indulged by the employees?
Yep. I think in the civil industry, what I'd class as good jobs, and you and me done together, was projects like the Crazyburn bypass, Stage 1 of Geelong bypass. Stage 3 might have been a bit different, Stage 2, but Stage 1, they were good jobs and we had a lot of fun there, and I think we made a lot of gains there too, And of course, on the refurb of Geelong Road years ago, we made some gains there, Ralph. And you might remember, we had trouble with traffic speed and past the blokes working beside them. And I think it was yourself, and we said, Vic Roads, we said, you got to get this traffic slowed down. I said, oh no, it's going to take 7 days to do that. We can't do that. And so we said, I think you might have said, all right, we'll see you in 7 days. And next day, it all happened. But on those traffic management things, there's traffic management now where traffic slowed down. And it was bloody dangerous before. Yeah. You work beside you, bum up against the road and people going past 100, 120 k's an hour.
Just digressing a little bit from that, I can remember one of our stewards being on a section up near Altona Meadows, and they were in the middle of the road, and the sheds were in the middle of the road, and next minute they were joined by a surfboard that had come off a car at going 100k past it, and it was like a missile.
And I think a dog trailer come off a tipper once and went over the barriers too.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yes.
So I think that's one thing in the civil industry that it took a bit of convincing, but we did do a bit now. A lot of companies are making money out of all this traffic management.
Oh yes.
Yep.
There's a lot of people who've never worked in the industry or getting jobs on traffic management.
Oh, there is, yep.
And good money too.
Yep. And that's the other thing that's changed in the industry a lot, Ralph, when you think about it. We had a big blue years ago because quite a few riggers, you go to visit them in the hospital, had fallen and no vegetables. We had a big campaign on walking the steel. And I remember we were told, how do you think we're going to build this place? You couldn't bring anything in here because all this bloody stuff around them. Blokes were walking through the mud and Christ knows what, and hanging by there trying to put burlins up. And anyway, eventually they got the message. So what do they do now? They put a concrete slab down for the floor. And they put the steel up. So you're putting the steel up like that, and everything works a bit faster. Bring a boom lift in and the job's made in no time.
Yes, it has changed in that regard.
But that was all done by the union. That was fighting the employers on that one was a big thing.
Now, any other jobs you'd like to mention? Well, we've been involved in a few. Eastlink, CityLink, Westgate Freeway any number of times. Yes, there's been a lot of them.
Yep. And I remember the interchange on the Calder Freeway. Yep. Where they had boom gates up and CT cameras on, making sure we don't go onto site and talk to the blokes. And then there was Safety Beach down at Mount Martha.
Yes.
Where Balderstone did everything they could.
Yes, there were a few blues over the journey, but at the end of it all, I would have thought that you're sounding more positive about what was achieved in the last 30 years or so than negative.
Very much so, very much so. It's like everything, Ralph, things are a lot better today than what they was 30 years ago as technology's come on and work has improved and all the rest of it. For a long time we didn't get much support out of WorkSafe, in my view, or the Department of Labour. But hopefully they've come on more on board now. They used to seem to follow us around the sites where we had a bit of industrial muscle, they follow us around. But where we couldn't get the sites, they used to keep away too. Yeah. But I do think that, hopefully that's improved a hell of a lot,
And one last sort of question about technology. Did you get on top of your mobile phone?
No. That'll take time.
The organiser's curse. Everyone can ring you, but you stuff up ringing them.
Yep. That was always a problem too, Ralph. As mobile phones come on board, you used to have time to think about. You'd know about a blue. You'd have time to think about the blue, and you'd be able to go and talk to your members about what was going on. With mobile phones, the phone would go and be the bloody boss getting his ear first.
Yeah.
We had a secretary that used to love people getting into his ear first.
A little bit of filtering.
Yeah, I think so.
But in terms of all the issues that an organiser faces today, obviously it has changed even in the last 10 years, but do you think there was any particular problem that you had trouble with as an organiser from start to finish, other than bosses?
Depends what you mean.
Well, I would have thought that there are some things that you just cannot resolve. You cannot be everywhere all the time. Even the best of issues, you just have not got the time to cover them all. And I would have thought the industry is even bigger now and much harder to deal with. Do you think that's, or did you think? Do you think in those days we were more in control of the industry and how we interacted with it?
I think you're probably able to keep more in control of it now with mobile phones and all the rest of it. But it used to be very difficult you'd be up in the country somewhere and you get a phone call about some site in the city, and that was very hard to fix by remote, you know. But I think in later years I probably enjoyed doing a lot of those civil sites where you were more independent than what you was if you just worked in the CBD building sites, you know. I think that was a good thing, you know. The owner-operators, they were good blokes, but there wasn't much support there, which is sort of sad, because nearly all these excavators are all owned by owner-operators now, aren't they?
Yep. But in terms of pluses and minuses, at the end of the journey, I would rate you as a 9 out of 10 for perseverance and persistence with even the worst of bosses. And I'll relate a little story to the listeners. We were up at Craigieburn, or Crazyburn Bypass, as it's sometimes called, and we were having a discussion with the project manager, and you did a wobbly and walked out and left me there. And when I got out afterwards, I found you in the shed waiting with a cup of coffee. And do you remember what your words were?
Got no idea.
Maurie, what was going on? And your answer was, I'd run out of things to say, so I thought I'd better get out. The boss was totally confused and agreed to everything.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of aspect of the industry which I remember fondly, and I'm sure you do too.
Yep. I remember one time with L.U. Simons, who was not a bad supervisor up around Albury-Wodonga, and I used to go pretty well with him. I was with Brendan Murphy one day. We got down to Warrnambool, and they were doing the Warrnambool police station, and this bloke shirt-fronted Brendan Murphy. So
Foolhardy move.
So we made a bit of an issue of it, and Brendan myself was going down to Portland from there. So I got the word out, and we got bands put on all over the place. L.U. Simons about this bloke having to go at Brendan Murphy. And this supervisor I knew, I forget his name now, but he was a good bloke. He kept trying to ring to resolve it. Of course, analog phones at them days. And as we went along, I kept saying, "Oh, the bloody thing's dropped out again. The bloody thing," because they were getting all frustrated, but all the way down we were killing ourselves laughing at it. So we used to have a bit of fun like that, but today I don't think you're supposed to do that anymore.
Well, you're not even allowed to use bad language now, even in industrial disputes. But we have come out the other end, Maurie, and you are now enjoying retirement. 12 years has passed quickly.
Yeah, 12 and a bit, yep.
And you're still keeping contact with people in the industry?
Well, that's one of the good things about the industry. And I'm not talking about crane owners, I'm talking about full stop.
Yeah.
Over 12 years since I retired, the union still looks after me. They still stop in touch with me. Brendan Pitt called and saw me the other day, get all the mail and all the rest of it. But no, the union's been good to me. Now, you tell me another place you can go and work, there's not many of them that still look after you all those years, you know. And I guarantee if I like to bring up the union with a problem now, they'd do what they could for me, you know.
And just think, you got paid money for all those years to have fun.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Righto, so thank you to Maurie Hill. Now, as I said at the start, Maurie was a long-term official of the FEDFA, which became part of the CFMEU, Construction in General, and has been in retirement, as he says, for 12 years. And congratulations on a great period of service to your fellow workers, Maurie.
There's 22 years of it.
Yep, even with brambles, however bad an employer was, you still stuck to your guns and kept it going and kept it going all that time.
You know, maybe not for this, but when I worked on the Harbour Trust on the portal cranes unloading ships the first time before the tug strikes, they had this fantastic old boss, great old fella, you know. And when there's no ships in, we had to stop on site. We wasn't allowed to go up, and then he'd be working all weekend and overtime and all the rest of it. But we'd be doing homes, changing motors over in cars under the wharf, fishing and making this and making that. And all Lockie used to say to us was, if someone comes out from head office, just make yourself scarce or grab a broom or anything you like, you know. And if you ever had a home problem, he wouldn't dock you, he'd cover for you. I never heard of him again for years, until a couple of years ago I was talking to a neighbour of his. He lived over the road from him. At the time he was 102. So I went and saw him. What an interesting old bloke he was. He come from Burke. He's the oldest serving member of World War II in the region. He said that, Maurie, the hardest years of my life was droving sheep back in the Depression up there, you know. He had a fall. They put him in hospital for a couple of weeks and then breastplate, and he came home again, and they put him into high care, you know. And I took Lorraine up to see him. She wanted to talk to an old man about it. Well, she loved him for a start, you know. You have to keep going back and seeing him. God, he's a fantastic old bloke. The most interesting old fellow you ever talked to. And anyway, this day he's a bit sick. And I said, look, we've got to go now, Ocker, but I'll be back to see you next week. I'll be here, he said. And he apologised to me and said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hill, I've got a kidney tray and I'm sick. And they upped his morphine and he died on a Saturday at 103. But Jesus, you've never seen a boss like that. That was my first FODFA boss. He was a gem. And the organiser then was Malcolm McDonald.
There you go. And just to finish up, Malcolm McDonald will be one of the interviewees on this little project which we are calling Creatures of the Industry. All about the people who come into the industry, stay in the industry. They don't just blow in and blow out, make a quid and who cares. They actually stay in the industry and they love the industry. But we will be interviewing a lot more people over the coming years. Thank you very much, Maurie Hill, and congratulations
Thank you, Ralph.
A great service to the union movement. You have been listening to Creatures of the Industry, the Concrete Gang's fill-in show for this summer, and there will be more interviews to come over the following weeks and hopefully an ongoing series well into the future. Thank you for listening.
Produces mighty profits for the greedy MBA.